Ever wonder what really lies below your skin surface? Join me on a fascinating journey to discover the mysteries of the largest organ of the body. I'm going to be going through all of the appendages of the dermis now, starting with the sebaceous gland. So the sebaceous gland is attached to the hair follicle and it produces sebum. Sebum is an oily substance that's secreted onto the skin surface and is mainly found in areas of the body which you may know as being more oily or greasy. For example, what is called the T-zone, so across the forehead, down the nose and onto the chin. Also areas in the scalp. Let me show you what the sebaceous gland looks like. Firstly, I'll need to draw a hair, like so. I'm going to draw the skin surface and I'm going to draw the hair follicle. Now the hair follicle traces all around the hair, and on the side here, this is our sebaceous gland. I'm going to carry on the hair follicle around the hair and up this side. Now, I'm going to represent my sebum or my oily substance as a green pen here. It's not really green, but let's say we've got sebum within that hair or sebaceous gland, and it secretes onto the skin surface. So it goes up through the hair follicle and then lubricates the very top here on the epidermis. And that's really good for waterproofing the skin. And also, the more sebaceous glands we have and the more oiliness we have on the skin surface, we actually don't wrinkle as much. It's really good. Though it can go the other way and cause problems like acne where there is excessive sebum. I'm going to move on to the Arrector Pili muscle. Now, if you've done the muscular system, Arrector Pili muscle is a smooth muscle, not a skeletal, a smooth muscle. And it sits on the side of the hair follicle like so. So here's our smooth muscle. And when that muscle contracts, it's going to pull the hair upright. So I'm just going to draw you a picture of when that works. So the hair will now look like so on the skin surface. Got the hair follicle, missed off the sebaceous gland there. And as the hair stands upright, it actually closes the follicle entrance. So you get a little bump like so. What do you think that bump is? That's a goose bump. So where you get cold, your hair stand up on end, you feel a little bit tingly, you see these little bumps, that is all there to keep the warmth inside your body. So it's the Arrector Pili muscle that's working to stand the hair upright and to seal the follicle entrance. Moving on to the sweat gland, and there are about 3 million sweat glands in the entire body. I'm going to draw one now on this diagram. So I'm extending the skin surface, coming down here. This is our sweat gland at the bottom. This is the sweat duct. The duct is something that carries the sweat. And this entrance or opening onto the skin surface is a pore. So there's a pore. Here's our sweat gland. Now, as the sweat gland produces the sweat, it will come up this duct and onto the skin surface. There are actually 3 miles of sweat ducts in the body if you add them all together. Now, the water on the skin surface, when it evaporates, will be the thing that cools us down when we're too hot. Capillaries. Capillaries are the blood vessel network where exchange of gases happen. I just want to add to my picture an epidermis at the top here. So that's the very top section of skin. Now, capillaries will only extend up to the top of the dermis here. I'm going to draw them in red because it normally represents the blood vessels. And a capillary network might look something like so, where you have deeper blood vessels nearer the surface. It might look similar to that. There's also a specialized one at the bottom of the hair follicle, and that's supplying the hair with nutrients to grow. And that's called the dermal hair papilla. Let's have a look at the nerves in the body. Nerves I'm going to represent in green, and there's nerves, as you can imagine, all over the body. Now they will extend up. There are some nerves that actually go into the very bottom part of the epidermis, like so, not to the top part. And we'll go on to the epidermis layers towards the end of the video. So we've got nerve endings here, we've got nerve endings around the sweat gland, we've got nerve endings around the hair follicle, and they detect heat, pain, pressure, touch and cold. By pain, I mean changes in tissue, whether it's stretch or inflammation. They do have specialized names. So if you watch my nervous system video, we'll be looking at things like nociceptors, thermoreceptors, proprioceptors. So check out that video as well. We've mentioned sweat glands, but there are actually 2 different sorts of sweat glands in the body. The first one is eccrine, E-C-C-R-I-N-E. And an equine sweat gland, when I teach in class, I like to say the E stands for everywhere. And we've got sweat glands all over the body. There are areas that do have more, that when you sweat, you're quite aware, maybe more in the armpit, on the palms of your hand. And these are stimulated by heat. So when it's hot, you will sweat more, but also by arousal and excitement. As you can imagine, I'm so excited filming this video now. I think I've got a little bit of equine sweat gland activation going on. Now, I said these equine sweat glands are found everywhere, but there's one bit of skin in your body that doesn't have equine sweat glands. I'm going to give you 2 seconds to have a think. That was a long 2 seconds. Hopefully, you may have said here the lips. The lips don't have equine sweat glands. And sometimes when you are hot, you might taste a bit of sweat, but that's from above. But the actual lips themselves are the only bit of skin that don't include these equine sweat glands. So the other type of sweat gland is apocrine sweat gland. E for everywhere except the lips. A for, excuse this, airy areas of the body. So where might you have natural hair? It would be on your scalp and genitalia and armpits. So these areas are the areas that contain these apocrine sweat glands, and it produces a stickier form of sweat. Now, this mixed with bacteria on the skin surface causes the body odor issues. The equine sweat from the equine sweat glands is completely odorless, but the apocrine mixed with the bacteria is a condition called apocrine bromidrosis, or body odor. So the different sections of the skin I talked about were this top section here, the epidermis, and if you've looked at any of my other videos, epi is a prefix that is to do with outer or end. So, for example, the end of a bone is an epiphysis. So this word epi you will see quite a lot. This is the epidermis, and I'm going to come back to that and look at the 5 sections of the epidermis. The big section of skin here is the dermis, and that is the area that contains all of what we call the appendages, the additions to the skin. Now, in real life, the epidermis is about the width of a piece of paper. So if I had a piece of paper here now, imagine how thin that is, and that is made up of 5 layers. The dermis, depending on where that's found in the body, can be up to 0.5 centimetre or as small as 1 millimetre. So on your eyelids, you can imagine it's very small, and on the palms of your hand, it's a lot thicker. And then the bottom section, if I had a yellow pen, I would kind of draw it like clouds, like so, yellow tissue. And that is our adipose tissue, fatty tissue, that is the subcutaneous layer of the skin. So if you're ever asked in an exam, what are the 2 main sections? Epidermis and dermis would be the answer, but there's actually 3 sections, and this is the fatty layer. Underneath the fatty layer, you're going to have muscles and other connective tissue. So this adipose tissue or subcutaneous layer is made of fat. And although a lot of us think fat is a bad thing, fat is so important in the body for many different functions. And in the skin, it helps to protect from knocks and bumps and helps with insulation. Around our appendages in the skin, we have 2 proteins, collagen and elastin, which lie throughout this area. The collagen is there as support and for structure. It's quite a strong material. And the elastin is the stuff that allows our skin to stretch. As we get older, unfortunately, the skin becomes less elastic. So just have a look at this. It's a pinch test. I'm going to pinch the back of my hand, okay, and let go. And you will see, you know what, that is so depressing, because I've been teaching this for 25 years, and 25 years ago I'd do that and I wouldn't even see it. Bing! Now it took about 0.5 second. The thing is, I did this on my gran the other weekend, and I went back a week later and it was still up. So it's showing as we age, the elastin in our skin starts to break down. They're like rubber bands. Instead of being really stretchy, that elastic band you've left in the window, and as you pull it, starts to snap. Now I'm going to do a surgical operation. That's why I've got my glasses on now. I mentioned earlier about the epidermis and the 5 layers of the epidermis, and there only being some nerve endings in the very bottom, which allows me to do this. Now, can you see the needle? Come in nice and close. Hold on, let me get... a little bit of my epidermis. Can you see that? Not painful, no blood. So I've gone through maybe the top 3 layers of the epidermis. If I was doing that and someone scared me or made me jump and I was to go a bit lower down, going into the bottom of the epidermis or into the dermis, that would be painful. I would actually feel the pain of the needle and you'd probably see a droplet of blood as well. So that's just a nice demonstration to show that there's no nerve endings in that top section. I like to use acronyms when I teach for functions of the different systems. And for skin, we're going to use the acronym. Let's write it up on the top here. Shapes, VD. So we've got 7 functions of the skin. The first one, this first S here, is secretion. Now, can you remember what is secreted from this diagram here? We had secretion of the sebum from the sebaceous gland up through the hair follicle for waterproofing the skin surface and acting as a body's own moisturizer. The H is for heat regulation, and I have mentioned a few ways the skin regulates heat already. So one of the ways we talked about was the sweat gland producing sweat onto the skin surface for evaporation to cool us down. Another way was this red thing here. Do you remember what that was called? That was the Arrector Pili muscle, which stands the hair upright and forms the goosebump. So the goosebump keeps the warmth in, and the hair, if all the hair stood up on end on the skin surface, it would actually form a still layer of air really close to the surface, which acts as some form of insulation. Now, us being humans and not quite as hairy as other animals out there, it's not quite as good. But if you imagine a cat, a dog, a bear, they have a lot more hair, and that would be really, really good for insulation. Carrying on with heat regulation, we have a shivering mechanism. So when our core body temperature drops below a certain degree, around 37 degrees centigrade, there's stimulation of skeletal muscles to actually cause a rapid vibration of the skeletal muscles. Any contraction of muscle fibers produces heat because of the friction and helps to warm up the blood vessels around the area. If you're really cold and you're stood at a concert and you're watching something but you're stood still, the best thing to do is wiggle your toes. Wiggling your toes means your calf muscles are working. You've got the friction of that warming up the blood, and that blood will go around the body. So any movement at all is really good for producing heat to help warm you up. The last point for heat regulation is the blood vessels here. So have you heard of these 2 expressions, vasodilation and vasoconstriction? Okay, so when something dilates, it opens up, it gets wider like our pupils. When something constricts, it gets smaller, more narrow. So with this capillary network here near the skin surface, if we were really cold, what would happen? The most important thing to keep warm in your body is to keep your vital organs supplied with blood. So it's not that important this outer bit of skin is kept warm. So what happens, there are 2 things. Either we have a capillary shunt, okay, so we don't get any blood flow through this top section of capillary. It's a deeper flow of blood. And the other thing that will happen is a vasoconstriction. So the blood vessels near the skin surface get smaller and less blood flows through. And you can see that when you're really cold and your skin looks paler. Alternatively, if we're exercising, if we're excited, if it's really warm and you see your cheeks go red, it's the opposite. It's vasodilation. So these blood vessels near the skin surface get wider. We get more blood flowing through. And then looking from the outside of the skin here, you would see more redness. So that's vasodilation and vasoconstriction to allow either more or less blood flow through to that area. Next letter in my acronym is A for absorption. Now the skin likes absorbing different substances. One thing it does like absorbing is this, naki or it could be any lotion, but Naki lotion is what I use to massage with if you've watched my massage videos. So if you put a little bit of this on the skin surface, just rub that in, okay? After a few minutes, Naki is actually really good because it does stay on the skin surface for a bit longer and allows a nice glide when you are massaging. Okay, but eventually that will sink into the skin surface, like when you moisturize. The things the skin likes absorbing are certain drugs and toxins. As an example of different drugs the skin absorbs, think of the HRT patches that ladies can wear when going through menopause. So that's absorbing estrogen into the skin surface. And also, if you're trying to give up smoking, and stick nicotine patches on. So the skin draws that drug into the blood circulation, and that's another way of taking in a drug into the body. Next up, we've got P for protection, and the skin's really good at protecting us from many different things. For example, this. Now, there are many of those around, inside your body, outside your body, in the air, on food. That's my version of a bacteria. But the skin is really good at protecting against bacteria entering. Bacteria can enter the body through mucous membranes, for example, your eye, nose, mouth, ear. And also, if you have a cut on the skin, so you're cutting through the epidermis and now that is open. So that's where bacteria like to enter the body. But the skin as a protective membrane is great when it's intact. We mentioned this one earlier, the adipose tissue or the fatty tissue underneath the epidermis and the dermis. So this is the subcutaneous layer, and that helps to protect against knocks and bumps and wear and tear. Skin can also help protect us against damaging UV rays. So the sun coming down here, trying to enter the skin, too much UV ray or without protection, SPF, can actually cause skin cancer. So we do need to be protected. But there's special cells in the epidermis, which we'll come on to later, that can convert the UV rays into vitamin D. So that's really important. E for excretion, and we secrete sebum, but we excrete sweat. So coming back again to this diagram here, we've got the sweat gland, the sweat duct and the pore, and we've got sweat on the surface. Now, what exactly is sweat? Sweat mainly is water, but you will find salt and urea, the waste product, coming out through it as well. But all that will help to get rid of waste in the body, excess fluid, but also help to control our temperature. Now, other things you might notice when you sweat is different smells. For example, I had a curry last night and it was really garlicky. And this morning I went out for a run and I could smell the garlic coming back out through my pores. So within your sweat, you actually get rid of aromatic substances. Coming on to the final S, remember the first one was secretion? This one is sensation. There are 5 main sensations within the skin. There's heat and cold, which are different receptors, pain, pressure, and touch. And by pain, I mean change in tissue elasticity or inflammation, different changes within that. So the skin is really good at finding any kind of problem areas and then sending that message to the brain, and the brain will decide what to do with that information, and therefore we may move away, we may take a hand off a hot plate, we may decide something is too much pressure and change our movements. So sensation is our 6th function of the skin. Our 7th function is VD, and this is vitamin D production. So this is created from the UV rays, converted into vitamin D by the cell melanocyte. So when these melanocytes convert, they produce melanin into the basal layer of the epidermis we're going to talk about later and have a look at those 5 layers. But the more melanin that is produced, the darker the skin surface. So just remember the 7 functions of the skin. S, secretion of sebum from the sebaceous gland. H is heat regulation, shivering, goosebumps, the capillary network. A for absorption of creams, drugs and toxins. P for protection, including this fatty layer at the bottom and the nerve endings. E for excretion of sweat. The final S is sensation through our nerve endings. And VD, vitamin D production. We're moving on to the top section of the skin, the epidermis. So we've got a diagram here to show that. And we're going to be looking at the 5 layers of the epidermis in a bit more detail and the structure and function. So the 5 layers of the epidermis, we're going to start off with the bottom layer, and the bottom cells are columnar epithelial tissue, which are tool cells like so, with a nice big nucleus at the bottom. So this is the basal layer, and in Latin it's the stratum germinativum, meaning to germinate and to produce new cells. Now it does this via a process called mitosis. So if you've heard of mitosis before, as a side point, let me show you here. When one cell splits, divides, it starts to divide like so, and it becomes 2 genetically identical cells, each with a nucleus. So that is the process of mitosis, which happens in all body cells except the sex cells in the ovary and the testes, and that's a process called meiosis. So mitosis happens here, and as these cells age, they start to push up and form the other layers. These will eventually become the top layer of the epidermis, which will be shed when you see the skin falling or peeling off. In this section also is where we find the melanocytes, which produce the melanin converted by UV rays, which produce vitamin D. And the melanocytes tend to be over the top of each nucleus for protection. So this was the bottom layer. Underneath the bottom layer here, we've got the dermis. So imagine the dermis, and this is the skin surface. The next layer up from the basal layer is called the prickle cell layer. And these cells now are a little bit smaller. I'm drawing them as distinct layers, but if you imagine they progress through, they will slowly change shape and morph into the next layer. So this is the prickle cell layer, and these are connected by fine little filaments like so, which act for support and structure, but also pass the nutrients it's gaining from the blood vessels down here in the dermis, and it's allowing these areas to grow and split via mitosis. But the process of keratinization starts in this layer, which means they start to lose fluid and also become more hard and more durable. Another name for this section is the stratum spinosum, the Latin name. So let's move up another layer now. We're getting to the granular layer. The granular layer are thinner, flatter cells. And again, imagine each cell becoming the next cell and pushing up. So they lose fluid, they flatten, and the granular layer, the nucleus now in the middle, has broken down. So these cells are now dying or dead. Okay, without a nucleus, they would be dead. The Latin name for this section is stratum granulosum. We're moving up to the 4th layer now, so we're getting nearer to the surface. And this section, I'm just going to draw like this actually, it's the clear layer. So it's lost the nucleus completely, it's dead. So these cells are transparent and they control water transmission through the skin. This section is also only found in the more dense areas of skin in the body, or the thicker, more durable areas like the palms and the soles of the feet. So you won't find this section here in the eyelids, for example. The Latin name for this is stratum lucidum. And finally, we're moving to the outer surface of the skin, and I'm going to draw it like flat cells like so. That will be flaking off. You know, if you've been on holiday and you've got a nice tan and you exfoliate, these will be the cells that you see. But that's quite visual. It happens all the time. And actually 80% of household dust is dead skin cells. So these cells have progressed. These cells were originally down here in the basal layer. And this section is the horny layer, known as stratum corneum. Stratum corneum is the Latin name. Now, how long do you think it would take for cells in this layer to progress through, to change until they become this cell and then are exfoliated or naturally fall off? Well, it takes around 30 days or a month for that process to happen. Now, the healthier your skin, the quicker that will happen. So if you do exfoliate regularly, have massage regularly, you know, that process might be a bit quicker. But also as we age, we know the whole process slows down. So older people, Let's go 70, shall we? 70, 80. This process might even be 40 days, 50 days, 60 days. And the skin won't look quite as healthy. So the whole process takes around a month, and we've gone from basal to prickle cell to granular to clear to horny, and the horny cells will eventually fall off. So I hope you found that video interesting and learned all about the structure and functions of the skin. If you like that video, please make sure you've subscribed to the channel, give me a thumbs up, and please watch future videos.